So, the topic that I wanted to talk about tonight is um, how early recovery and even late recovery, to be honest with you, it feels as though we can take things in a more literal way or concrete way. Um, Last time we talked about grounding, and I had several of you share that no one had ever shared with you the reason for it or why we need it in its relationship with dissociation. And my disclosure of what does grounding mean and what does that feel like? I asked several therapists before I got that answer, believe it or not. It doesn't come in all of our trainings, but um, just using some um, elaboration on the recovery process and kind of what that looks like, maybe from what some of our own self-judgment like might look at as literal or concrete ways. And then also it- just the I want to make sure I'm grasping it. Um yeah, the self-judgment that comes along with that. So when we think about recovery, um, especially recovery at the Healing Collective, that's working towards our truest and highest self. And the reason that we use that definition is because our business model, treatment model is centered around inner child and what that relationship looks like with my present day adult self, as well as my backstory or my childhood, my trauma, whatever um, semantics work for you or wherever you are in your recovery process. When we think of literal or concrete, I want to create a lot of validation around those terms because even just saying them, my body's reacting a little bit because it feels more like judgment rather than describing the process that's happening. So I want to talk for a minute about what makes it literal or what makes it concrete. When we're in a healing process or when we're pre-healing even, and we're in an experience where when it's hysterical, it's historical, which means something's happening in my present day life, but the relationship with that emotion goes all the way back to my backstory. And it may look different how it's being triggered, or it may even not make a lot of logical sense as to why am I getting triggered by this? The reason that it feels so foundational, so all or nothing, concrete or literal, is because in that moment, I step into my little girl. I step into my inner child and she starts driving the bus. So, depending on how old she is in that situation or in that relationship, an example of a relationship could be not being good enough, not being worthy, not feeling loved. My relationship with not feeling good enough goes all the way back to as long as I can remember. So when I am triggered or in that trauma trigger, I can become very literal because developmentally, I am little. When trauma happens, there is an emotional stunting that happens. The reason that we know trauma is because there's an actual biological response that happens in our body. It shrinks the gray matter. But what also happens when it shrinks the gray matter is there's an emotional stunting. So at whatever age I experience that trauma, and remember the definition of trauma is it's about an experience, it is not an event. So what I experience as trauma, you may not, or vice versa. But when I experience that emotional stunting, my chronological age continues to grow. I continue to get older. And what brings most of us into therapy is this discrepancy. Emotionally, I'm this age. Chronologically, I'm this age. And that really, excuse my language, but that really fucks up relationships. Relationship with me, relationship with me and other. Conflict resolution doesn't really happen for a 5-year-old. When you think of that relationship with I am worthy or I feel unworthy, goes all the way back to my childhood. My little girl starts driving the bus and she's about 5. So developmentally, it would make sense that I feel very literal or I feel very concrete. And one way to know it is my language will even become so. It will become very all or nothing. Absolutes like always, never. You're never around when I need you. You're always making fun of me. Doesn't that kind of sound like a little one? It, it's their world is so little that that's all they've experienced. And it's also one way that my team is able to support you in your process, because even in sessions, we can get triggered and our language shifts, how we talk, what we say. It's quite a shift. And when we get the honor of developing safety in a relationship with you and we're meeting with you weekly, that becomes something in session where we can then say, wow, something just happened. Your language shifted, your tone shifted. Something just happened. And that's one way we know that is because in our relationship with you, it becomes very apparent that if you're me, I'm no longer a 43-year-old woman. I'm kind of acting like a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old. And that's not a judgment and that's not an insult. That is a process that's happening because emotionally I'm stunted. So when I go to create resolution or when I go to bat for myself, the 5 or an 8-year-old isn't going to win that argument. And that's what keeps us stuck. It keeps us in the patterns relationally, is when there is this discrepancy. And the work that you're doing with my team closes this discrepancy. The more of those generational patterns that we're healing, the more of those trauma experiences, not events, but experiences, the more we close the gap, the more we become in alignment with self. The other thing that happens there is identity. For so many of us, when our trauma story goes all the way back, there wasn't an opportunity to develop a lot of identity because we needed to fit in a box or because we needed to act a certain way, be a certain way. One phrase I frequently say is looking good, feeling bad. I was the youngest of 4 girls, and it didn't matter what happened in our house on Sunday morning. We were sitting in church in a dress, acting ladylike, even though dad and mom had a huge blowout. So looking good and feeling bad is a frequent pattern that sounds and looks like having a really hard day. And then someone asks me, hey, Em, how you doing today? You seem a little off. And I say, I'm fine. Anyone ever experienced that? My little guy joined, but he can't hear. I have my AirPods in. So the literal or the concrete, the reason that we start spinning and we stay in the cycle is because rather than being this loving parent in this place of discrepancy, we start doing to me what was done to me. And so if in the moment where we're on a vacation or on a road trip and we need to go to the bathroom and we say, Dad, can we stop and go? I really got to go to the bathroom. And he's like, you just went 2 hours ago. The experience we had frequently at children was needs were an inconvenience. You're okay, baby. Sorry, little flashlight isn't showing up. It's okay. It's in your room, honey. So sorry. That just broke his little heart. Mommy will fix it while I talk, okay? So when we experience my needs are an inconvenience or asking for what I need is not a priority, it starts to create a relationship with myself. And then all of a sudden, I also start to, oh, it's working. Good job. Sorry. I also start to work double shifts in the hospital. And I'm so proud because I can work 16 hours without stopping to pee. Hmm. Did you hear my relationship with being unworthy and how far it goes back? Or having a need and it not being a priority? As an adult, I then did to me what was done to me. So rather than knowing how to reparent that, I continue the cycle by doing to me what was done to me, thinking that if I can go 16 hours at the hospital and not peeing, that's a great thing. No, the hell it's not. But that's the message that was sent to me. And what is done to me and the messages that I receive become my own narrative. So judgment is what keeps me stuck. I'm an inconvenience, or other people are more important, or gosh, I can't believe I just did that. Whereas now in recovery, what I learn is reparenting. What I learn is the way that this gap closes is not by being self-critical or judgmental. The way that I close this gap is actually by acknowledging my needs. But that's really hard for a lot of us to do because we've stayed stuck so long and we've lost that identity. We've lost those needs. So feeling literal or concrete, especially in the moment of being triggered, or feeling judgmental of trying to walk out recovery techniques, it really is part of the process. And it's so fucking annoying because it is part of the reason that we stay stuck until we learn, oh, that's where the relationship comes from. As a human, I have a relationship with everything, with work, with food, with my husband, with my kids, with my dogs, with exercise. So the more I recognize how I'm showing up in my world, the more I can recognize where my priorities are and how I'm a priority. So I hope that this was helpful for the request. I hope that I hit on what was needed. And we'll go ahead and stop the recording now so we can share experience, strength, and hope if you guys are open to it. The way that we learn is through repetition. When you think back to kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, maybe Bible study, the way that we learned was through song, through rhythms, through poems, and we repeated them over and over and over again. At church, we sing hymns and we repeat them over and over. Songs, the way that we learn the lyrics is because we listen to them over and over. So one thing that I'm really grateful for in my recovery, hang on, Finn, I'm almost done. Even though I have 17 years, I'm so glad I wasn't limited on the number of meetings I could attend because there's no way I could have taken enough notes. And I attend meetings today, and there are still topics that I hear that I relate to something for the first time. A light bulb goes off. And I even teach it. I'm not exempt to this. But I'll think, wow, like the experience with us traveling on vacations and Dad never wanted to stop for us to pee. That was an inconvenience. That was a basic need. And he was just a Navy chief. He just wanted to get to the destination. It wasn't intentional what he was doing. And thank goodness there's not a limited number of meetings we attend, because the more we hear it, the more we make sense of it in our own story. So when we're closing that gap from that chronological age and that emotional age, we're reparenting that part of ourselves. And thank goodness I get more opportunities to do that. Each time I am in a trauma trigger, I will reframe that as it's yet another opportunity for me to reparent myself. It's hard for me to think to say that to myself because it hurts like hell. And it's another opportunity for me to show me that I'm important because I wouldn't think twice to do it for my babies. But somehow, for me, it takes a lot of active work to do it for me and me. So the tool in that is the reparenting, but it's also what we're doing right now. It's the meetings. The more I hear it, the more I color myself in, the more I make sense of my story, and the more I develop those constellations. So they aren't just topics, they make sense to me. And the more I close that gap, the deeper I go with it. So once I'm done with my 12 steps, if you do a 12-step meeting, you just restart them again because we work on a different layer. So I hope this was helpful for you guys. Um, yeah, I hope I did this topic justice because it feels really deep.